everybody. How you doing? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now that was certainly a contrast from the debate that we watched between Biden and Trump, wasn't it? But I've got a lot more to say about it. Welcome, folks. We're all reacting to what we just watched. Not quite the train wreck we saw when Biden and Trump debated. I guess maybe the glass domes between them perhaps helped, but here we are. We are reacting to the vice presidential debate. I've certainly got some thoughts. Glad you're here with me, and we can just go over them point by point by point. I can answer your super chat questions. We will react. Now, folks will know that I am particularly interested in this debate due to the fact that I wrote a book about one of the people. I wrote a book about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris and the future of America. And so I have studied her a little bit more in depth than other political figures in the United States at this time. But there's a lot to react to from that debate. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell so you get notified every time we do one of these. Join us, yes, if you've got any questions, just shoot me a super chat. We'll do a roll call a little bit later, and point by point, I will give you my reaction to what we just saw. All right. So first of all, folks will remember that Mike Pence has done this once before, right? Mike Pence debated against Tim Kaine, who was the vice presidential candidate of Hillary Clinton. Do folks remember Tim Kaine? Tim Kaine, the figure that people said reminded them of like the new stepdad that the single mother brings home, with the eyebrows. And he was like, "Do you like baseball? Well, I like baseball, kid." And that part of what actually got Mike Pence and what got Donald Trump elected was how poorly Tim Kaine did in his debate with Mike Pence in 2016. I mean, it was an abominable performance. Writing it down, religious views. Writing it down. Just abominable. Mike Pence is a broadcaster. Folks, I actually made a joke. Perhaps somebody made it before me. I can't remember if I heard it from somewhere else or if I thought of this, but I mean, it's very accurate. And the joke goes like this, but it's not just a joke, it's kind of a statement. As a radio host in Indiana, Mike Pence blamed Barack Obama for all of Indiana's problems. And then he was elected governor. And as governor of Indiana, he blamed Obama for all of Indiana's problems. And now he's vice president. Oops. No, seriously. When Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, he did nothing to save the state. I mean, he passed that anti-gay law, and that was about it. Other than the anti-gay law, he did nothing for Indiana. Nothing for Indiana. He presided over deindustrialization. He presided over the state getting poorer. He presided over the rise of opioids, killing people in the state of Indiana. Mike Pence's record when it comes to Indiana is awful. I mean, he did nothing from the governorship of Indiana except blame Barack Obama for all of Indiana's problems, which Barack Obama was very responsible for lots of the problems in Indiana. But yeah, I mean, the guy doesn't have a very good record, but he is a neocon, and he is an evangelical Christian, and he's got broadcast experience. And Mike Pence, like I said, who's more dangerous? Like I said, Mike Pence, he's got this cowboy thing going on. Yes, Mr. President, I am Mike Pence. I'm tough. I speak slowly. I kill terrorists. I like America. It's got this it's like he thinks he's Clint Eastwood, right? He thinks he's a cowboy. Yes. Kamala, your record doesn't so much back that up. We don't quite like that out here in Indiana. There's that movie, what's the movie? I think it's Gran Torino, where Clint Eastwood, he like grabs like some gangster off the street. And he's like, that every so often you meet somebody you don't want to mess with. That's me. That's Mike Pence, if I ever met him. You ever meet somebody you don't want to mess with? That's Mike Pence. I mean, it's unbelievable. That said, Kamala Harris, on the other hand, totally different style. Totally different style. Kamala Harris is all about the emotional climaxes. All about those emotional climaxes. If you were wondering where you would get your next roll of toilet paper, oh my gosh, right? Wow, do you remember that? Wow. And folks, if you ever want to know when Kamala Harris is really mad, just go find that clip of, I'm speaking, okay? And it's this interesting. It's very much like a manager smile. It's like somebody who works very, very hard to control their emotions. And it's this she's talking, and Pence interrupted her frequently. Frequently interrupted her, and she just has this demented smile on her face that's like, I want to kill this mf'er, right? That's what she's thinking. And she's like, I'm speaking, okay? And she's got this like smile on her face, like, she's ready to blow a gasket. No, I mean, if somebody was interrupting me on national television, I might feel the same way, okay? There's nothing wrong but did you see that moment? That is angry Kamala Harris. If you want to know if you're getting under Kamala Harris's skin, that is the look that tells you whether you're not, right? She sounds mad. She sounds like she's sticking up for you. She's giving this, but that look, that demented smile, that I am gonna, that demented smile she had on her face, that was epic. Yes, everyone's talking about the fly. There was a fly on Mike Pence's head. I tried not to tweet about it. I was just like, how long is this fly going to sit on this man's head? It was kind of funny, but I didn't want to comment on it. But, so they both had their respective styles. Mike Pence was the quiet talking cowboy. Kamala Harris was the tough prosecutor who's going to fight for you. If you don't know where your toilet paper is coming from. Oh, boy. Yes. She builds into this with his stories about, and builds into this climax, and she's going to fight for you, and Joe Biden has suffered, and Joe Biden has loved, and Joe Biden, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Oh boy. Now, in terms of false things that we heard, everything related to the Middle East was way off. I mean, way off. What was disturbing, I mean, we know why it was disturbing. I mean, we know why, but Mike Pence said a whole bunch of stuff related to Iran and ISIS and the Middle East that is just flat out wrong. Point number one. He says the United States military, all by itself, defeated ISIS. All by itself. All by itself, right? ISIS's caliphate used to be this big, and then the U.S. military rode in there on a white horse and... there's this other country called Syria, the country that ISIS caliphate was actually in. There's this other country called Iran that sent its Revolutionary Guards to fight against ISIS. There's this other country called Russia that sent its Air Force and did a lot of the bombing to fight against ISIS. There's this other fighting force called, God forbid I say it, Hezbollah, that did a lot of fighting. But no. The United States, there's the Kurds even. I'm not a big fan of the Kurds necessarily, but, the Kurds even. Oh, no. The United States did it all by itself. All by itself. All by itself. The United States defeated ISIS. And, of course, he conveniently leaves out the fact that ISIS would never have been created if it were not for the Obama administration and the U.S. government's policy of arming fanatics and extremists who worked against the Syrian Arab Republic. You'll remember in 2011, the CIA started working with Turkey, started working with Jordan, started, mobilizing all kinds of jihadists and extremists from all over the Middle East to go to Syria to bring down the Syrian Arab Republic. Syria is a socialist country led by the Ba'athist Party. And they have been a base of, religious tolerance. There's Christians there, there's Sunnis there, there's Alawites there, there's Druze there. It is a secular socialist country that is kind of a bastion of stability in the Middle East, divide in the ruling class. Divide in ruling class. Um, and it was a bastion of stability. The Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton State Department, they were determined to topple the Syrian Arab Republic. Syria, was offered to do an oil deal with Saudi Arabia or an oil deal with Iran. It opted to work with Iran to help Iran build a pipeline to the Mediterranean. And that was just too much. And, the regime change agenda. I mean, since the 80s, since the 70s, the USA has been trying to topple the Syrian Arab Republic. They don't like a strong socialist country existing. They don't like the fact that with the help of Russia, the Syrian Arab Republic built huge power plants, that it raised the life expectancy of the population, that Syria, wiped out illiteracy in the country, created universal education. I mean, you can read about the huge accomplishments of Ba'athist Arab socialism in Syria. I mean, millions of people have greatly benefited from socialism in Syria. Poverty eradication, medical care and access. I mean, Syrian television was considered some of the most high quality in the Middle East. They really subsidized the actors and TV producers to do some really high quality stuff on television. Christians, Druze, Alawites, Sunnis living all together in peace. In the capital, there's also Qatar, Turkey pipeline. Okay, all right, Qatar, right, right, and there's also, in the capital, you have a communist party, the Syrian Communist Party. You have the Syrian Communist Party, Bakdash. You have trade unions in the factories where workers are actually negotiating on their behalf with elected representatives. Again, Syria is a bastion of social progress and stability in terms of women's rights in that region. And, Obama and Western capitalist imperialism teamed up with Saudi Arabia to tear it down and started unloading weapons, and a number of the people who went on to become top ISIS fighters were part of the U.S. armed so-called moderate opposition. I mean, that's just a reality. And the goal of the Syrian rebels was not to create stability in the Middle East. The goal of the Syrian rebels was to overthrow a secular socialist country and replace it with something like Saudi Arabia. It was to create a caliphate of some type. Now, ISIS emerged from the U.S.-backed forces. He makes it sound like, the ISIS just kind of randomly popped up, Mike Pence says. Donald Trump has said weird things like Hillary Clinton created ISIS and stuff. Pence isn't going to go there. Pence is just a neocon. Pence is a neocon. Then on top of that, he makes it sound like the U.S. military single-handedly defeated ISIS, ignoring the huge efforts by Russia, the huge efforts by the Syrian people, the huge efforts by the Islamic Republic of Iran, the huge efforts by the Hezbollah organization. I mean, the communist militias that were formed, the Christian militias that were formed. I mean, the effort to defeat ISIS was a huge united front, right? It was a united front, and the Syrian Arab Republic and so many forces, but he just ignores that. Meanwhile, Mike Pence goes on to then allege, he says that $1.8 billion was transferred to Iran, right? As if, Barack Obama just said, hey, Iran, I'm going to write you a check. Here, have $1.8 billion. What was that money? Well, if you know anything about the Iran nuclear deal, which me, as somebody who's been to Iran, covered the Iran nuclear deal extensively, that $1.8 billion was Iranian government money that was in U.S. banks at the time of the 1979 revolution. At the time of the 1979 revolution, Iran had a dictator, the Shah, who was a U.S.-backed dictator who tortured people and murdered people, was awful, was letting the Rockefellers and Wall Street just rip the country off, was actually like an admirer of Hitler, the Shah, and considered the Persians to be the supreme race of Iran, to be white, to be, Aryans or whatever, just an awful regime, backed by the United States, of course. Then, 1979, the Iranian people had the Islamic Revolution. They overthrew the Shah. So when that happened, the United States then froze all the bank accounts of the Iranian government. Pence calling out Harris on her record. Yeah, right. We'll talk about that. Pence, Harris on her record. Then froze all the money that was in in U.S. bank accounts. All of the Iranian government's money was frozen, kind of like what we've done to Venezuela in more recent years, right? They just froze all of Iran's money. So the deal that Obama and John Kerry made with Iran during the Iran nuclear deal was that after Iran gave up its peaceful nuclear energy program and just got rid of it, At that point, Iran would get its money back after 3 decades. After 35 years, Iran would get its money back. That was the deal. That was what the Iran nuclear deal was, okay? It was not just writing Iran a check. Republicans love to say this. Obama gave Iran $1.8 million. No, the USA stole $1.8 billion from Iran, and the United States under Obama said that if you give up your right to nuclear energy, which Iran absolutely has the right to do, right? Under the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran absolutely had the right to develop peaceful nuclear energy. If you give that up, then we'll give you your money back. And keep in mind, it wasn't adjusted for inflation, right? There's been plenty of inflation between 1979 and now. So they had $1.8 billion. They got exactly the amount frozen in U.S. banks back. That total ripoff. Meanwhile, Mike Pence repeats the lie that Qasem Soleimani was in Baghdad to try and kill Americans or something. That has been so widely debunked. Qasem Soleimani was not in Baghdad to try and kill Americans. Qasem Soleimani was a top anti-ISIS fighter. Qasem Soleimani was somebody who had actually cooperated with the United States in Afghanistan. Qasem Soleimani protected Christians in Syria from ISIS. The murder of Qasem Soleimani was a huge gift to Al-Qaeda, to ISIS, and it was cowardly, right? It was not a battlefield attack. It was a drone assassination. And it was absolutely cowardly, and it was not a good decision at all. Meanwhile, but of course, Kamala rolls out the old lie. Okay, Ataturk, right? Ataturk. The old lie that Russia was paying bounties to terrorists to kill U.S. troops. Now, why in the world would Russia do that? Let's look at the logic here. That does not make any sense, right? And this has been widely debunked. I've done stories on this. There is absolutely no evidence that this happened, okay? And the evidence that's provided is like evidence that somebody made a bank transaction with somebody. It's not even evidence. There is no evidence that this has ever happened. This is a rumor. This is a rumor that's been drummed up in the press. Oh, Russia is paying bounties for U.S. troops, right? Which would not be in Russia's interest. Afghanistan is the center of the global heroin trade. Okay? Ever since the USA invaded Afghanistan, there's been nothing but instability and chaos in Afghanistan. Russia very much wants to make Afghanistan stable. That's what Russia wants. As somebody who has been to the Valdi Discussion Club and sat in the same room as former Afghan presidents and Russian President Vladimir Putin, I can tell you that Russia does not want more death and more chaos and more killing and stronger terrorist groups and stronger drug cartels in Afghanistan. That is the opposite of what Russia wants. Afghanistan is right there on its border. Russia wants Afghanistan to be stable so that the drugs stop flowing into Russia, so that the terrorist groups stop operating in these southern Central Asian regions where, you know, they carry out terrorist attacks. There's all kinds of Wahhabi groups all throughout Central Asia. Why in the world would Russia be handing out money to terrorist groups and drug dealers in Afghanistan? The people that they're constantly fighting. It doesn't make any sense, okay? And the New York Times, they provided this like, oh, well, we got proof here, and the proof was that some bank transaction happened. They couldn't prove who was the sender, who was the receiver. It's a BS claim, right? There is no real proof of it at all. But it's something we are supposed to believe because Russia bad and Trump bad because Trump not hard enough on Russia. And Kamala Harris made that very clear throughout the debate, right? She made that very clear. She is going to out-hawk Donald Trump, right? If she and Joe Biden get in there, they are going to escalate tension with Russia. They are going to be harder on China. She said, remember the big quote, you lost the trade war, she said. You lost the trade war. Well, she's going to win the trade war, right? They are not going to be friendly to dictators, right? And they're going to get along with NATO allies. And, oh boy, Oh boy. Kamala is going to out hawk and Donald Trump at the battlefield. He said, what was in it for the soldiers? What was in it for them, right? He questioned whether or not, working class people should go off and die in the Middle East for big oil profits. How dare Donald Trump do such a thing? How dare Donald Trump, ask what was in it for them? Oh my goodness, right? How dare he, right? Oh my goodness. And how dare he question whether John McCain, who was bombing civilians and flying over Vietnam and bombing civilians and got captured, is a hero for doing that or not. I mean, oh boy, right? Donald Trump is a tree-hugging hippie. Donald Trump is a draft-dodging, unpatriotic, long-haired civilian. But Kamala, she is Pentagon all the way. Oh boy. If you're a progressive person, you got to be disturbed by that rhetoric. Got to be disturbed by it. Well, but there's plenty of things, that Mike Pence said that you can be disturbed by as well, right? Apparently, my favorite, this is just classic. Saying that cops are racially biased is offensive. Well, let me quote Trump supporters and Republicans' favorite thinker, Ben Shapiro, and say, facts do not care about your feelings, Mike Pence. Facts do not care about your feelings. They have done endless studies documenting racial bias on the part of the police officers. We have seen the videos. Okay, of what police do to African American men and get away with it. And the juries see the same videos, and the prosecutors forget how to prosecute over and over and over and over again. We've seen this. So I'm sorry if it hurts Mike Pence's feelings to suggest that there is racial bias in the policing system. I guess, but I'm sorry, Mr. Pence, facts don't care about your feelings. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris talking about good cops and bad cops. Oh boy. Yeah, Kamala Harris had no problem with the bad cops when she was the Attorney General of California, when she was the District Attorney of San Francisco Bay Area. Oh boy, right? Ask anyone who was involved in the protests around Oscar Grant. Right? Ask anybody who was involved in the protests in the Bay Area after the police killed Oscar Grant. What side was Kamala Harris on? Give me a break. We've all seen the video of Kamala Harris making fun of anti-racist protesters. Build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. She is not Black Lives Matter. She is not an anti-racist activist. Kamala Harris is the queen of mass incarceration. She started her prosecutorial career in California in the 90s when their prison rate was going through the roof. Right? California was famous for its infamous 3 strikes law. 3 felony convictions, you go to prison for 25 years, no matter what. There was actually a young man in California who his third felony that he got 25 years in prison for was cheating on his driver's ed test. 25 years in prison for cheating on your driver's ed test. That is the atmosphere in which Kamala Harris rose up and up and up and higher and higher and higher. And that voice that Kamala does, that escalating into the climax, that yelling voice, that is the voice that she used to convince jurors to unleash their rage and lock up low-income people and people of color, right? Kamala is all about punishment, sadism, revenge, and cruelty. She loves it. It thrills her. In that same video that you've seen of her mocking the protesters, build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. She talks about how the consequences for crime need to be swift and severe. She's a scary, scary human being. Now, of course, Mike Pence calling out her record, while at the same time insisting that you can't talk about police bias and racism. Mike Pence is Mike Pence, right? I mean, it is, yes, as the super chatter suggested, it was completely ridiculous. I mean, Mike Pence, I mean, it's loaded with hypocrisy, and we've seen that, right? They play both sides of the fence, right? You know, on the one hand, the Democrats are too anti-racist, too anti-cop. On the other hand, they're hypocrites and they're not anti-racist enough. This is just, you know, this is the Trump world, right? I mean, this is right. I mean, and this is how politics has become, right? You know, I mean, I will say there was one thing that Kamala said that I mean, it was refreshing rhetoric, honestly, when she talked about the need for, you know, you can't judge that Mike Pence and Trump have been judging the economy by, quote, how good the rich people are doing, right? That's true, right? And that the infrastructure of the United States has been left behind, that we need to be leaders in science. That was great. I couldn't have agreed with her more, right? I couldn't have agreed with her more. She is absolutely right. The physical economy of the United States has collapsed. Classical music, sure, we'll talk about that. Classical music, stimulation. We'll talk about that. But yes, I mean, you know, that's a very good point, right? And that the U.S. government, unlike China, is not funding research and development. It's not, you know, training engineers and scientists. It's you know, it hasn't been paving the roads. It hasn't been, you know, purifying the water properly. It hasn't been fixing up our decaying power plants. You know, the country's been left behind. Obama promised to fix it up, didn't do it. Trump promised he was going to do infrastructure week. He was going to fix it up, didn't do it. Didn't do it. Right? Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have delivered on the real problem that America is crumbling. America is falling apart, right? We are replacing, in many different states right now, they are actually replacing paved roads with dirt roads. Minutia in my book. Paved roads with dirt roads in many, many parts of the country. And Kamala is absolutely right. You know, Trump was right on the campaign trail when he talked about it. Obama was right when he campaigned, you know, on the same issue. Nothing is getting done about it. That's why I've emphasized the slogan, we need a government of action. Right? Indonesia. We need a government of action, right? Because you can't judge the governments by what they say anymore. You know, all kinds of politicians say all kinds of things. We need a government that will actually get things done. And when it comes to the infrastructure issue, there is a burning need for the infrastructure system to get fixed. Absolutely. Another thing that struck me, you know, this pack the courts thing. I mean, the Democrats are basically implying that they will pack the courts. Pack the courts. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that'll actually hurt them in the polls. I mean, the Democrats continue to have this reputation of rolling over and playing dead, selling out their supporters. Roe versus Wade, abortion is something that's very important to a lot of their supporters. And if the Democrats were to actually try and pack the courts, or if there was just the impression that they might actually pack the courts, you know, that's something that might win them a little bit of respect points. Look, folks, people, like, why does Mike Pence talk like a cowboy? Because it's tough. He looks tough. People respect strength. Let's be real about that. People respect strength. So if the Democrats, they won't say they're not going to pack the courts. Now, will they actually pack the courts? Wouldn't count on it. But, you know, that might actually help them, right? It might make it look like they're actually fighting for their base. You know, that said. Now, interesting that, so Mike Pence, you know, he's defending the Supreme Court nominee of Trump. He's defending Amy Coney Barrett. And he finds something that Kamala Harris said about the Knights of Columbus. Do we know what the Knights of Columbus is? It's the club for Roman Catholic old men, right? Back in the day, they had the Elks Club, they had the Freemasons, they had the Moose, the Loyal Order of the Moose, they had the Odd Fellows Club, they had the Lions Club, they had the, the lodge for Catholic old men was called the Knights of Columbus. It's an old joke from a Three Stooges routine. It's in like every Three Stooges sketch ever. They're in the woods, and Moe says to Curly, he says, "Let's go hunting. You get a moose, I'll get an elk." And then Curly says, "I'll find the Knights of Columbus." It's stupid, but it's a Roman Catholic club for old men. Mike Pence says Kamala Harris criticized the Knights of Columbus. How dare she? Right? Well, and most people that are familiar with the Knights of Columbus think, why, my goodness, what? I mean, who could criticize the Knights of Columbus? They're just a nice group of guys. Sure, they carry swords, but they're not weapon swords. They're symbolic swords. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. And then Kamala maneuvers around it by pointing out that Joe Biden, if elected, would be the second Roman Catholic president. Right? So Pence is trying to say Kamala hates Catholics. Kamala maneuvers around it by saying Joe Biden's Catholic. We've all avoided the issue, which is that Amy Coney Barrett is not really a Roman Catholic. Let me repeat myself. I know it might sound crazy to you, but if you're actually familiar with the issue, it's not. Amy Coney Barrett is not really a Roman Catholic. Amy Coney Barrett is part of a parachurch organization. A parachurch organization called the People of Praise, which is an attempt to mix Catholic theology with Pentecostalism, with charismatic Christianity. She is in a group of people that meet not in the sanctuary of a Catholic church, but rather in the basement. They play hymns on guitars, they speak in tongues, they cast out demons, they do weird stuff with fire. She is not a regular Roman Catholic, right? She is not a regular Irish, Italian, Latin American, Louisiana Roman Catholic who goes to Mass every Sunday. She is an evangelical. She's in an evangelical sect that kind of is linked to the Catholic Church. And she's not just a member of this group. I mean, apparently she was quite high-ranking in People of Praise. She and to be fair, and it's worth pointing this out, right? The Pope, right? Waco, wow. All right. Waco, rude. The Pope has been going around denouncing capitalism lately, if you haven't noticed. The Pope has been going around giving a speech against capitalism. Meanwhile, Amy Coney Barrett is tied to the Federalist Society, a group of free marketeers and libertarians who are opposed to a minimum wage. We think the minimum wage is contrary to the U.S. Constitution. Now, you can't get any further from Catholic teachings than that, right? The Catholic Church officially opposes capitalism. The Vatican is giving speeches all over the world right now. The Pope is going around condemning capitalism. Meanwhile, Amy Coney Barrett is so much a believer in capitalism that she hangs out with the Federalist Society that thinks that the minimum wage is too socialist. Right? The minimum wage is a threat to the free market. So, at the end of the day, this idea that the opposition to Amy Coney Barrett is just because she's a nice Catholic. No. Amy Coney Barrett is anything but a typical Catholic. Amy Coney Barrett is a free market fanatic, and Amy Coney Barrett is part of a strange, charismatic, Pentecostal, weird knockoff of Catholicism, a parachurch organization, it's called. So that's worth pointing out. What else? Kamala Harris, that was the best line of the night. We keep our word. You have to, with friends, you have to do what you say you're going to do. Well, the Democratic Party doesn't consider its base to be friends now, do they? The Obama administration was going to close Guantanamo. It was going to stop meddling around the world. Yeah, it was going to protect whistleblowers. Yeah, the Obama administration didn't keep its word. With friends, you keep your word. You do what you say you're going to do. Well, if you are a Democratic voter, the Democratic Party leadership, Obama, Biden, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, they don't consider you to be their friend. They have no obligation whatsoever to keep their word to you. Like, that's pretty clear. That was comical almost. Joe Biden will not ban fracking. You heard that from the mouth of Kamala Harris, Joe Biden will not ban fracking. So if you have concerns about the environmental, effects of hydraulic fracking, don't worry, Joe Biden will not ban fracking. Yeah, what a debate! What a debate, folks. It was something. I will say that folks are praising it right now all over MSNBC and CNN. They're saying, "Wow, this is a return to normal politics. Wasn't crazy like the last debate." Well, I mean, I'm sorry. They were, there were like big glass walls between them. The final question, from the eighth grader about Americans fighting each other and can't we all just get along? I mean, that was sweet, but it was kind of a waste of airtime. It was a waste of airtime. I mean, no one got anything out of that. I mean, that was just like, and at the beginning, the moderator, she gave a lecture about civility. And it was, this is obviously a huge reaction to the previous debate that kind of flew off the handle and how crazy it was. Did we learn anything from this debate? Not really. Everything went as expected. But that's where we're at. That's what we witnessed. This was the vice presidential debate between the two candidates. Lots of lies about foreign policy. One thing that stood out, Kamala Harris repeated what was said by Joe Biden. Destroy hope. Destroy. Kamala Harris repeated what was said by Joe Biden, that, they have done polls around the world that Chinese President Xi Jinping is more popular than Trump is. And not just Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin is also more popular than Trump is, right? That around the world, because of the way they responded to this pandemic, the dual Eurasian superpowers, Russia and China, with their economies largely centered around the state, central planning, these two governments of action that actually, don't just do what corporations want, but actually tend to control the corporations on behalf of the population, they are more widely respected because of the way they responded to the pandemic. That's a fact, right? Now, Biden is repeating this by saying you should vote for him to restore people's confidence in the United States. But it's a fact. I mean, I'm sorry. It is factually accurate. There are many, many reasons why people should admire Xi Jinping. Someone's saying I missed 2 super chats. What are they? What were these super chats I missed? They went by really fast. What were they? I don't want to miss anyone's super chats. What were the 2 super chats I missed? Someone repeat them. What were these super chats? Evangelical groups. All right, so evangelical groups. What was the other one? What was the other one? We got evangelical groups, and what's the other one? Went by really fast. What was the other one? What was the other one? We got evangelical groups. What was the other super chat we missed? I'm always writing down the super chats. Don't want to miss any super chats. Secularism. Thoughts on secularism. Thoughts on secularism. Alrighty. Okie dokie. All right. So, one moment that was kind of epic towards the beginning of the debate was when, Mike Pence framed Kamala Harris as an anti-vaxxer. Did folks catch that? Kamala Harris said, if Trump tells us to take it, I'm not taking it. And Pence called her out for, spreading doubt and distrust of a vaccine during the time of a pandemic. That was a flip. That was the old switcheroo, right? It's supposed to be right-wingers that are anti-vaxxers. It's supposed to be liberals that are anti-vaxxers. That was quite amusing to watch, on the one hand. The other thing that I thought was quite amusing, there was this whole thing that you may have seen. There was this whole thing you may have seen about the administration of Trump doesn't believe in science. Now, it's interesting because, that in and of itself you know, there's truth in what they're saying, what they're alleging. And they're right that the Trump administration, denies that climate change exists. The Trump administration doesn't fund scientific research and is engaged in austerity and cutbacks. That's true. But as somebody who's a bit of a nitpicker, I have to point out that science is not a religion. You don't believe in science. Right? There is no leap of faith in the scientific method. It doesn't work that way. You don't believe in science. You don't do that, right? There is a consensus within the scientific community. There are different studies that are conducted. There are theories. There are laws. I mean, anyone who's familiar with the scientific method, it is not a leap of faith. You don't believe in science. And while their criticisms of Trump, I think, are correct, especially when it comes to Pence, who's like a 6-day creationist, for goodness sakes. However, this notion that you must believe in science is very dangerous. And we've been seeing a lot of that lately. You must believe what the liberals say. You must believe what the liberal imperialists say because it's science. And if you don't believe in it, you don't believe in science. So all you have to do is pay a guy to stand there in a white coat and say it, and then if you don't believe in it, you don't believe in science. Now, the scientific method is a good thing. I tend to trust the scientific community, but I'm sorry. Sometimes science gets things wrong. And that is a very scary precedent. And you don't believe in science. You accept the science. You see what the consensus in the scientific community is, but you don't believe in science. But when you set up a precedent where you're expected to, quote, believe in science, that can be very, very dangerous. And you'll notice they don't believe in science from Russia, right? Though the Russian vaccine, all kinds of doubt cast on it. They don't believe in science from China. But they believe in science from the United States. It's scary stuff, folks. It's very scary stuff. I mean, am I the only person to point out that, there are a lot of false things that were once said by scientists who got it wrong? It took a long time to come to where we're at now, and I'm sure there are many things that we know today because of science that will be debunked. I mean, racial pseudoscience at one point was widely believed. That was debunked. Right? Now, in 1900, if I was going around and saying that no race is superior to any other race, Kamala Harris could have pointed at me and said, "You don't believe in science." Well, it turns out the science was wrong. There are many examples of this, right? That when you create, and they seem to want to create an atmosphere where if the science says it, you must believe it, which is in and of itself anti-scientific. The scientific method is based on a constant falsification, falsifiable experiments. So this is dangerous stuff. I will say that. I'm sure there's people cringing and throwing things at their computer screen right now when I say this and ready to punch a wall, but I'm just trying to tell you that, and you'll notice they don't believe in science when it comes from Russia, when it comes from China, right? They don't believe in it. I mean, Ayn Rand alleged that it's alleged that Ayn Rand said that Sputnik was a hoax. Couldn't have happened, right? Because communism could never invent space travel. They're still, they're still making all kinds of claims. Look, I mean, the scientists have said that the chemical attacks in Syria that couldn't have been done by the Syrian government. There are a number of scientists who come forward and said that. Do we believe in science when it comes to that? No. But all Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have to do is they have to pick something and pick a scientist who believes in it. And if you don't agree with them, you don't believe in science. And maybe you should be banned from YouTube for not believing in science. Maybe you should be banned from Facebook. Maybe you should be put into a psychiatric facility for not believing in science. Maybe you should have your tongue pulled out for the the defense of the public because you don't believe in science. You're causing people to doubt what the science says, right? You're spreading conspiracy theories, right? I mean, this is how the totalitarian stuff is coming from the liberal side at this point. I mean, let's be real about it. I mean, there's a lot of crazy, authoritarian rhetoric coming from the right. But, there is a scary, scary totalitarian trend coming from the liberals right now. Russiagate has been debunked how many times? But if you don't believe it, Russiagate in and of itself is a discredited conspiracy theory. However, nowadays in liberal circles, if you don't believe in Russiagate, if you don't believe that somehow Donald Trump getting elected was the result of a vast plot involving the Kremlin, if you don't believe that, if you do not accept that, you are considered to be a conspiracy theorist, and you should be silenced on social media as such, right? This is not good. This is not good, and that's one thing that disturbs me about Kamala Harris. I will say, in terms of what they said, right? In terms of what they said, I probably leaned closer to Kamala Harris because, that infrastructure point was true and all of that. But, I know Kamala's record. I know the hypocrisy there. And Mike Pence, I'm not seeing any hypocrisy. He believes in what he says. It's just what he says is wrong. So again, I'm not going to vote for either of these people. I'm just telling you straight up. I'm in New York, so it doesn't really matter, right? The electoral vote's here. Everyone knows they're going to go to Biden anyhow. But I'm not going to vote for either of these two because, they both disturb me. So that's where we're at. That is my reaction to the debate we just watched between Mike Pence, the cowboy, Kamala, the emotional climax prosecutor. That's my reaction. So I hope you folks enjoyed it. We got a number of super chats to get to, and if you have more super chats for me, I will happily answer your questions. But if not, let's go. Let's do our roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations, folks. I'll call you out as I see you. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Somewhere, USA. Salt Lake City, San Jose, Daniel in Los Angeles, Richmond, Virginia, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Frank in Missouri, Vancouver, Canada, Pennsylvania, USA, North Carolina, Dust James, David in Milwaukee, Joey in Belize, Ben in Denver, Australia, Florida, Wilmington, Delaware, Texas. Very interesting, thank you. Fly in the Hair, Utah, Orlando, Florida, Toronto, Canada, Astoria, Oregon, Chandler in Georgia, Travis from West Palm Beach, Cleveland. Kinky says, Joshua Tree, and thank you for the super chat, Kinky. New Orleans, Springfield, Missouri, Queens, New York City, Lloyd Bennett, Lyle from the People's Republic of China, Southwestern Michigan, Fallbrook, California, Daniel, New York City, Rapid City, South Dakota, Louis from Boston, West Palm Beach, John Clements, Denver, Colorado, Rochester, New York, Portland, Oregon, Cincinnati, Ohio, Rio de Janeiro, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, Northern California, San Antonio, Texas, Fairhope, Alabama, Long Island, New York, Moscow, Russia, Corey, Mississippi, Zurich, Switzerland, Terre Haute, Indiana, Kendall in San Diego, Shaniqua from Buffalo, David Fox in Mildura, Australia, Patrick in Los Angeles, Stuart Becker in Texas. Hello from Salem, Oregon, says Alex Giovanni. Rally once again in Baltimore. Chihuahua, Mexico. Hawaii, Oha. JT24 in Mississippi. Marilyn Ferguson in Arlington, Virginia. San Antonio, Texas. Welcome, 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 welcome. Melbourne. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Vallejo, California. Jason Sarna is with us. Welcome. Always glad to have you with us. South Florida, Harold Sullivan. Rio de Janeiro, Urbano, Leon. Oh, wow. Great times. Robot Persona says, what will happen when Caleb gets too popular to read the roll call? Well, we will cross that bridge when we come to it. We will cross that bridge. Stalinikov from the USSR, Rio de Janeiro. Okay. All right. Mary in Shyville. Bobama. Very good. Very good. All righty. We will have to lobby him, says Shaniqua McAdams. All right, let's start talking about these super chat questions. And if you've got more, I will give you an answer. First question is my religious views. I am a Christian. When I was a child, I was baptized as a Lutheran, but shortly after my baptism, my parents switched to the United Church of Christ. I grew up in a United Church of Christ church that was actually from the Swiss Reform tradition. They were not part of the congregational tradition. The town I grew up in was almost all evangelicals. And as I was growing up, I was very frustrated with evangelicals. Going to a school full of evangelicals was quite frustrating for me. Part of the reason I'm not a big fan of Mike Pence. I was very frustrated with the evangelicals. I started to get more interested in communism and socialism as I was a teenager. The communist and socialist groups were pushing atheism, so I started to lean that direction. I did get confirmed in the United Church of Christ, but I ended up, I was more or less an atheist. In college, I was definitely an atheist, and really my religious views started to shift back toward Christianity as I was visiting the Middle East. And it was my experiences in Iran and on the ship to Yemen that really kind of reestablished my relationship with Jesus Christ. I did not convert to Shia Islam, despite the internet rumors. I think that being in Iran, surrounded by deeply religious people, being in situations where my life was potentially in danger, on the boat to Yemen that was threatened, and that whole story, that all pointed me toward a situation where I reestablished my Christian faith. I would call myself a Protestant. I've never really understood Catholicism, so I'm definitely a Protestant. I'm certainly not an evangelical. I don't believe in the six-day creation. I don't believe that the Bible is literally every word true. But I do consider Jesus Christ to be my Lord and Savior. I do study the Bible. I do pray. And faith is a deeply personal matter to me. And my attitude, someone asked, I'll just knock this one out while we're here. Thoughts on secularism. I am a strong believer. Okay. Whoa. All right, so we're going to start with dialectical materialism. False, not scientific method. All right. That's going to take us a long time to answer, but that's okay. But as far as the secularism thing, I am a strong believer in a secular government. I believe that faith is a personal matter. That the government of the United States should not be Christian, it should not be Muslim, it should not be Jewish, it shouldn't be Catholic, shouldn't be atheist. I believe that there should be the separation of church and state, and I am a strong believer in that. And honestly, even though I do believe in God, I don't think that the words under God should be in the Pledge of Allegiance, because the government should not be preaching at people. I don't believe that the U.S. government should in any way be promoting religion or atheism. The U.S. government should not be interfering in my personal spiritual life or the spiritual life of anyone else. And growing up in my little town, there was a constant use of the U.S. public school to promote Christianity, and that got under my skin. And it wasn't just Christianity, it was evangelicals. I don't know how many, Thanksgivings I sat through sermons by evangelical pastors who were invited to my school to give sermons. That's not constitutional. Don't know how many Christmas school plays I was in where we started talking about Mary and Joseph, and that's not constitutional. Personally, if you are in a U.S. government-funded school, they shouldn't be pushing religion in it, right? They shouldn't be. Now if you're at a private school, that's your business, right? But I very strongly believe in the separation of church and state, right? And I also believe that one's religion should not play a role in political organizing. Alrighty. Okay. Have I ever read... Alrighty. Writing it down. I would never believe that, right? I have worked in political organizations with Jews, with Muslims, with Christians, with atheists, and I don't believe that there should be any religious test for membership in any political organization. And I have no problem working with anybody, and I don't believe you should create an atmosphere where people feel stigmatized because of their faith. You know, okay. Glory days of CPUSA. Lessons for now. I don't believe that you should ever create an atmosphere where people would feel stigmatized in a political organization because of their faith. I think that anyone who's building a socialist group should make it so anyone of any faith would feel comfortable in it. And that, you know, I mean, that your politics and your faith is a personal journey that all of us go on our own. And, you know, that's my belief. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. Knocked out two of those, religious views and thoughts on secularism. I'm in favor of secularism, and I explained my religious views. Okay. Who is more dangerous, Kamala or Mike Pence? Neither. I mean, they're the same. They're neocons. I mean, you know, Trump is a different animal, right, than both of them. But I mean, they're the same. I mean, you know, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China, yeah, they're the same faction, right? That the same, let's be real, okay? The Rockefeller think tanks that funded Planned Parenthood also funded the Chicago School of Economics, right? And that Pence and Kamala are very much part of the Cold War normal, right? That's kind of what they are. They both, you know, Pence is an evangelical Christian hardliner. Kamala is a, you know, a synthetic leftist, kind of, but, you know, at the end of the day, they're both kind of blasts from the past. They're blasts from the past. Kamala rose up and in her career during the lock 'em up 80s and 90s, you know, neocon era. Pence is a neocon evangelical. You know, I don't really, I think that both of them are very similar. Now, Trump is a little bit of a wild card, but a dangerous wild card. Joe Biden is the establishment trying to suppress Trump. But Pence has largely been an anchor for the establishment within the Trump administration. And Kamala is the establishment trying to retake the White House from Trump. So, you know, and Kamala really is the one that the establishment picked. I mean, there's no way. Look at Joe Biden, how tired he is. There's no way he's going to do 4 years. You know, I mean, we're going to get President Kamala. We are going to get President Kamala. So there you go. All right. Why did you become so obsessed with divisions in the ruling class? Well, that's interesting. Now, this was a concept that it's interesting to think about. Now, I first started to come to the conclusion about divisions in the ruling class when I was living in Cleveland. And I was studying William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals, and I was studying the Russian Revolution, and I started to realize that fights in the ruling class generally precede any revolution. And I would say that, and people, you know, got, you know, should I join? Okay, 1 second. All right, should I join PSL or D? I join or... All right. Well, here's the thing. You know, I started realizing, right, the Russian Revolution was preceded by a division in the ruling class over World War I. You know, the Chinese Revolution was preceded by a division in the ruling class, and Japan's invasion, and Chiang Kai-shek, and all of that. The Cuban Revolution. That revolutions are generally preceded by a division in the ruling class, in which the working class is brought into politics. Then I came to that conclusion. And then somebody who was my very, very good friend for a long time pointed out to me that this is a common belief, and pointed me toward a book called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. But then this person told me that they felt like the basis, the belief in a division in the ruling class was what they said was the basis of modern revisionism. They thought it was un-Marxist. But then, as the Trump stuff got started, this same person that educated me quite a bit about politics started, you know, re-educating me about some of the long-lost analysis about divisions in the ruling class. And I reread, there was a Sam Marcy pamphlet called Generals Over the White House, which was about the Carter administration and the Pentagon. And so then I went and reread The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. And I reread Generals Over the White House by Sam Marcy. And I revisited a lot of the writing on the 1930s, and I started to learn about the Rockefellers. And you'll notice that I gave a speech in Brazil in 2016. I was invited to speak at the Congress, or what is it, the Trade Union Congress of Brazil, and to a crowd of 5,000 trade unionists, I gave a speech about oil price manipulation and the fight between the fracking companies and the big four super major oil companies. That speech is now available online as a video and as a book, Oil and the Capitalist Crisis. So, I became particularly interested in that. Ferdinand Lundberg wrote a very, very good, series of books, The Rich and the Ultra Rich, The Rockefeller Syndrome. Carroll Quigley, of all people, he was this historian. He wrote about the Anglo-American establishment and the role of the British Empire. And I've studied this stuff in great depth because it's very, very important. Understanding U.S. politics and who's going where, this stuff is really, really important. And that if you just announce that all the capitalists are bad, we need socialism, you're not really teaching your audience anything in a lot of cases. You need to know things in a little more depth. So there you go. But yeah, there was a friend who mentored me who I've referenced before, and, he's not my biggest fan anymore, and that's okay. Friendships don't always last. Politics can sometimes undo very, very good friendships. But, I have learned a lot from a lot of people, right? I am somebody who wants to learn, right? I am cursed with a constant thirst for knowledge. If you saw the look on my wife's face when new books arrive at the house from Amazon, this apartment has so many books in it, you wouldn't believe it. And I purge the bookshelf all the time. But there you go. Okay. Someone mentioned that not only did Syria decline a pipeline with Saudi Arabia, but on top of that, Syria also declined a Qatar-Turkey pipeline. Well, that was just kind of a comment made, but they did it. All right. What are my thoughts on Ataturk and Kemalism? Ataturk and Kemalism. Well, Kemal Ataturk, Planet of the Humans. Okay, all right. Planet of Humans. Death called Malthusian. Alrighty. Kemal Ataturk, he was the founder of modern Turkey. He was very opposed to Islamic government. He was a very strong advocate of secular states. The quote from him is, "Blessed be he who says I am a Turk." A military leader, a strong man, a bourgeois nationalist. There was some impression that he might have, he was friendly to the Soviet Union because he was at odds. He was at odds with the ruling classes of the West, and so he was friendly to the Soviet Union. But he wasn't a socialist or anything like that. But he was a nationalist, a populist, the creator of modern Turkey. And Turkey's legal system, Turkey's state, is very much, based on Kemal's teachings. Now, he was very much, in favor of, and that's, you look at what's going on now with Armenia and all of that. So, there are definitely some big problems with his belief system. But, he created modern Turkey, right? So there you go. All right, classical music stimulation. Okay, well, here you go. All right. So, classical music, if you listen to it, it's about patterns. It's very much about patterns, but it's not just repeating. Modern music does two things. It either hypnotizes you by repeating the exact same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and it has kind of a hypnotic effect. It makes you kind of high. Or it's so emotionally dramatic, it like shocks you with emotional drama. And sometimes it does a combination of both. Classical music is a little bit different than that. Classical music, it gives you variation, but along, within a certain form. You know, you listen to Bach, you listen to Beethoven, you listen to Mozart, you listen to, you know, Schubert, you listen to, I don't know, I mean, just a lot of it, Haydn, Handel, right? And that it does, you do something else in your mind, okay? The thing is that the hypnosis, right, the repeating, the beat that just repeats, it gives you a little bit of a high because you're like, you know, you're kind of hypnotized by it. You know, the emotional stuff like Wagner, it's like, you know, or the rock and roll climax, Stairway to Heaven, right? That's emotionally like stimulating you. It's kind of like Kamala Harris's scream. It's like sexual almost. It's like reaching a climax. It's, you know, but classical music does something different with your mind, right? Classical music, it's not hypnotizing you, number one, and it's not, you know, sexualizing or you know, trying to sexually climax with you. It's simply playing with patterns. It's almost like mathematical in a way, and it causes your mind to operate in a different way, right? The way your mind operates when listening to modern music and the way your mind operates when listening to classical music is very different because your mind is doing different things. You are paying attention to patterns in the classical music, and you're, you know, meanwhile, when it comes to modern music, you're kind of being hypnotized and being taken on an emotional journey. Now, modern music has its place. Classical music has its place. I wake up every day and go to sleep every day with classical music because I want my mind to think in a rational way, not an irrational way. I want to make myself smarter, not stupider, right? And that, the hypnosis of regular music, the emotional climaxing of regular music is not how I want my mind to be. I want to be more perceptive, right? And so I listen to classical music every night before I go to sleep, every day when I wake up. And, and I play chess for the same reason. I'm awful at chess. You have no idea how bad I am at chess. I am the worst chess player you've ever met. That's why I play chess. John F. Kennedy, he very famously said, "We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." Exactly, right? That you try to find what are the intellectual or cognitive weaknesses of your own mind and work on them. I know that I'm bad at chess. And so when I'm at work, when there's a downtime, I am on chess.com. I'm playing chess because I'm bad at it, right? I'm very attracted to modern music, right? I like the hypnosis. I like the emotions, the wild emotions. So before I go to sleep, after I wake up, every morning when I'm drinking my morning Diet Coke, every night when I'm laying there with the lights out trying to go to sleep, I put on classical music because I want my mind to be stimulated in that way. I want it to pay attention to patterns and variations. I want my mind to think more mathematically and less emotionally. And so there you go. I hope that that is helpful, and I hope it answers your question. Alrighty. All right. In my book, did I talk about Mnuchin? No, I didn't talk about Steve Mnuchin in the Kamala Harris book. Sorry to disappoint you. I mean, it's a short book. I couldn't talk about everything, but there you go. Okay. All right. Protests in Indonesia. Well, Indonesia is a country that, there's a big division there between Muslims and non-Muslims. The ethnic Chinese community there has suffered a lot of discrimination. And, they're in the U.S. camp. We know about the genocide in East Timor that happened, where the U.S. government basically worked with the Indonesian military to conduct a genocide in East Timor. We know about the coup. Barack Obama was living there as a child, and that his stepfather, was involved in a coup. And then, they were hunting down communists and just mass executions of ethnically Chinese people on suspicion that they might be communists. And, the region has had a lot of difficulties. And we also know that in Indonesia, there are a lot of Islamic forces that are tied to Saudi Arabia. There are a lot of mosques, and there are a lot of Islamic, institutions that are funded by Saudi Arabia that preach hate for China. And hate for ethnically Chinese people, and that the Saudi influence in Indonesia is big, and there's been some terrorist groups for example. And there you go. All right. Yeah, I mean, the people of Indonesia, they're mad about austerity. They're mad about their economy. They're protesting. I think that's a good thing. All right, Waco and Ruby Ridge. Okay, so Waco, I remember Waco happened when I was a kid. I remember Waco. I was a child when Waco happened. I heard about it on the news. I was very young. And religious group. It was, people, it was more or less a cult. Unnamed diet beverage here. We don't do product placement. I might slip and say it, but it's unnamed diet beverage officially on this channel. Um, I don't know enough about West Papua, Brave New Perth. But, it was a religious group, religious cult. The Branch Davidians, they were called, some people say that they were called the Students of the Seven Seals, but, people named them the Branch Davidians. David Koresh was the leader. They were a very strange religious group. The leader, David Koresh, was this guy with this like shag 70s haircut and big glasses who liked to play the electric guitar and be a rock star and give people lectures on the Bible. And I guess they had guns. There was suspicion that they were involved in some illegal weapons sales. And based on that, Turkish Eurasianism, I'll write that down. There were some illegal weapons sales, allegedly, but I think that was later proven to not be accurate. Regardless, there was a standoff. The Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco went in shooting, and there was a standoff, and then for a few weeks they were surrounded. They had food inside of there, and they wouldn't come out, and they tried to negotiate a surrender, and they let David Koresh go on CNN and give a religious rant. And, they tried to negotiate, and ultimately the place ended up getting firebombed and everyone died. It was pretty awful incident. Why not peacefully negotiate? Why escalate to that level? And it became kind of a rallying cry for the militia movement of the 1990s. I believe Oklahoma City was on like one of the anniversaries of Waco, the Waco incident. And, it was a big standoff, and it was totally unnecessary, right? I mean, there could have been a negotiation, but instead there was a big standoff, and it was almost like they were looking for a place to have a big standoff. It was kind of a show of force, and it was very similar to what the move bombing was in Philadelphia in 1985. Very similar. It was just they find some political group that's got a house, and and it's all that, and kill them all, right? And that's what happened. That's what happened. I mean, some political group or some strange religious group. I believe the Branch Davidians were Zionists. I believe they lived in Israel at one point. They had, encampments in Israel or something, but they were a very, very strange, they had a unique interpretation of the Bible, and yeah, Philadelphia, the Move organization, right? John Africa, very strange group, they protested against the zoos. They were against zoos. They're kind of radical vegans, I guess, and, they had some strange religious beliefs, but regardless, they firebombed them, killed them, right? And I've interviewed Ramona Africa and Pam Africa. I mean, it was a similar thing. It was like after the political upsurge of the 70s was over, as the 80s got going, as the late Cold War normal, was completely solidifying, the U.S. government was kind of sending a message that, we're in charge here, and if you're going to set up a group that looks like it could be somehow a threat to us, you're not gonna live. And Ruby Ridge was right before Waco, and that was one guy, right? But it was something to do with, they charged him with illegal guns, and he was a far right-wing extremist, and and then there was a shootout, and again, it was a situation where they could have negotiated, and instead it was, a big shootout, and, the federal agencies were kind of flexing their muscles. They went after, black organizations like Move and the Black Panthers. They went after religious sects like the Students of the Seven Seals or the Branch Davidians. It was awful. Were there bad things about the people in the building at Waco? Absolutely. The leader of the group was somewhat of a sexual predator. That's true. It was like they had strict control over people in the group and such, but none of it justified a massacre. I mean, and it was a massacre, right? I think that David Koresh was a little bit of not a little bit, was quite an egomaniac, and that if David Koresh had not been such an egomaniac, and he'd just been willing to surrender, there was no reason they had to all go down like that. But David Koresh, he was not, he was very excited to have all the publicity and be on the front page, and was not willing to give that up. And wasn't willing to come out. Meanwhile, I think the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco were very excited to use their big guns and, demonstrate how powerful they were. And it just kind of shows that, it kind of shows something that I've been trying to explain to people, which is that, there are like traditional ways that people have, right? There are traditional behaviors in humans. You talk about martial virtue. You talk about the death penalty, right? And often, one of the aspects of what you can call the synthetic left, or really not even really the synthetic left, but the more liberal wing of the ruling class, the more globally oriented, the more social managerial wing of the ruling class, is that they don't do that kind of thing, right? Very great example I'll give you. 1969, right? 1968, Martin Luther King is killed. Every urban center in the United States goes up in flames with, Black rebellion. The civil rights movement, has become the Black liberation movement. Students on the universities are protesting the war in Vietnam. So you'll remember that at that time, Huey Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, was charged with killing a police officer and was facing potentially the death penalty. Right? Now, I can guarantee you that if you had asked almost every cop in this country, especially every white cop, should we give the death penalty to Huey Newton, they would have said yes, absolutely. But imagine what would have happened if they had executed Huey Newton. Imagine what would have happened in the context of 1969, 1968, 1970 in the United States. Imagine that the U.S. government had given the death penalty, or the California had executed, the state of California had executed Huey Newton. What would have been the results for the United States if that had happened? Think about it. I mean, there would have been a violent revolution. I mean, there would have been an armed civil war in the United States. There would have been, there's a reason, I think Huey Newton was innocent of the crime, but does that ever matter? Aren't the prisons full of people that are innocent of the crime? I don't think Huey Newton killed those police officers. But imagine that they had killed Huey Newton. Imagine they'd given Huey Newton the death penalty. There would have been an explosion of social rage like you wouldn't have believed. It took a more managerial wing of the ruling class to say, let's find a technicality and drop these charges and de-escalate this. And that more strategic and managerial wing of the ruling class, they're the ones that say de-escalate, negotiate, maneuver, right? And that a lot of the Pentagon guys and a lot of the local cops don't like them because they're all about this old, traditional martial virtue stuff. In their mind, there was a shootout with some police officers. They want Huey Newton to die. End of story, right? Life for a life. They're not thinking strategically. Right? And the same, the Vietnam War, the USA had no chance of winning, the massive bombing and all of that, right? I mean, the USA had no chance of winning in Vietnam. But Richard Nixon was like, oh, we're going to win. I'm not going to be a president who loses a war. Well, the more strategic wing of the ruling class is saying there's no way of winning, right? That there is a more strategic wing of the ruling class that is calculating long term, right? Meanwhile, you have a lot of just the state apparatus, cops, Pentagon guys, military brass that just want to, they just want to do what, would the Roman Empire have killed somebody like Huey Newton? You betcha they would have. They killed Spartacus, right? But a more strategic ruling class will sometimes do things that in the short term look like weakness on the part of the state, right? That's why, Biden and Obama favored negotiating with Iran, Whereas, Trump and Netanyahu and Mike Pompeo want to escalate with Iran. Strategically, right? If you want to, weaken Iran in the long term, if you want to set up a color revolution inside of Iran, you want to destabilize Iran, the Obama strategy is probably more effective. But you don't make a lot of money, you don't blow things up, you don't escalate tensions, right? You don't, kill. I mean, it's, again, it's this kind of traditional, masculine, authoritarian, martial virtue, that's the mindset of your local cops, your military. Meanwhile, the more managerial, long-term thinking, Harvard, Yale, CIA kind of people have a different viewpoint, right? Right? Huey Newton was innocent. I'm glad he was released. But if the U.S. government had executed Huey Newton, I mean, that would have, in that context, for the U.S. ruling class, they would have been shooting themselves in the foot. They would have been shooting themselves in the foot. And there's a lot written about this. William S. Lind, who was somebody who wrote for the U.S. Marine Corps publications. He actually wrote a book on what he calls the concept of fourth generation warfare. William S. Lind, and in his writing, William S. Lind talks about how, like, the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland would never have been accepted if the British military had inflicted more casualties in Northern Ireland. Right? Right? And that the main way that the British government fought against the IRA was not with the government, that they gave covert support to, Protestant fanatical groups, to ultra-leftist fanatical groups that opposed the IRA, that in Northern Ireland, the British government was careful, right? And that the Good Friday Agreement, if the British military were going around doing a lot more of the things that they did that the Irish people hated, the Good Friday Agreement never would have gone through. And, we all know about peace and reconciliation. And there was a campaign of kind of like, you look at what happened in Northern Ireland. Like, think about it, right? The British were ultimately able to maintain control and get the Good Friday Agreement, signed because they utilized a more strategic method rather than escalating with the Irish population. Right? That yes, there was plenty of inhumanity and assassinations, and there was plenty of awful things that were done to the Irish people, but a lot of them were done in a more covert way with counter gangs, for example. Counter gangs. In fact, Frank Kitson, who was the British intelligence officer who put down the Mau Mau Rebellion, the Land and Freedom Army in Kenya, he wrote a book called Gangs and Counter Gangs, where he talked about these kind of strategies for, waging a war. I don't want to go into too much detail about this. I'm kind of rambling, but the situation in Waco is a great example of if you escalate, people die, right? And, at Waco, they went in there with guns blazing, and then there was a standoff, and a bunch of people died. And there's been bad PR about it. There's huge amounts of rage about it. It was an awful, awful thing that happened at Waco. I'm not an advocate of branch Davidianism, but what they did at Waco was wrong. I mean, that shouldn't have happened. All right, probably spent way too much time talking about that, but that's okay. All right. All right. Kamala, will she destroy the hope for socialism in the United States? No, I don't think she's going to destroy the hope for socialism in the United States. No, I mean, why would she do that? I think Kamala is just a problematic figure who represents in a lot of ways what's wrong with leftist politics in the United States at this time. That's all. That's why I wrote the book, and I used her to make several points. Okay. What is the role of evangelical groups? Well, I talked about this on another live. What's interesting is, there are some evangelical groups that are for the masses. There are some evangelical groups that seem to operate behind closed doors. Family International is one of the ones that seems to operate behind closed doors. The family, the group that, that tends to operate behind closed doors. This People of Praise, not widely known. Whereas, there are evangelical groups that are recruiting among the broad population. I mean, the Moonies, for example. At this point, they exist, right? They exist, but they're not. In the 70s, people saw Moonies out on the street raising money, selling flowers. They don't do that anymore. The Moonies, I believe the movie Stolen Honor, which was about an attack on John Kerry, like the Mooney, a member of the Unification Church who had written a biography of Reverend Moon, actually put the book out. You know, and the Moonies, they had like a secret meeting at the office building at the with you know, at the Senate office building to crown Reverend Moon. You know, and but they're not in front anymore. There's been enough scandals associated with the Unification Church that they don't at this point operate in public. But they do Republican Party activism, and they have behind closed doors meetings with Republicans. And the same with the Family International, right? You know, they've never been a mass religious group. They, you know, there's that pastor who does the prayer meetings with Mike Pence on Capitol Hill, he's a former basketball player who's got a degree in geography, Capitol Ministries. And it seems like there are certain evangelical groups that are just for elected officials that don't show their face. The Moonies, the People of Praise, Family International, Capital Ministries. These are evangelical groups that are not meant for public consumption. These are Rasputin organizations, right? They're about whispering in the ear of elected officials and pointing them and doing one thing. You know, meanwhile, there's plenty of evangelical groups out there, right? I mean, there's plenty of Baptist groups. There's all kinds of mega churches, evangelical mega churches all over the country. But you know, I mean, it's just there are different groups. Different groups serve different purposes, I think. Okay, alrighty. Next question. Dialectical materialism. Is it false and not scientific? Well, dialectical materialism is not, I mean, it's not the kind of thing you do an experiment to prove. It's not I mean, it's not like the scientific method. It is a theory about how the universe works. The concept of dialectical materialism is the idea that all that exists is matter. That's materialism. But that matter is constantly in a state of conflict and change. That's dialectics, right? And that there's constantly a clash going on that creates progress. That's dialectical materialism. And science, I mean, look, if there's not motion going on, that's called absolute zero, and that doesn't exist in the universe for the most part. I mean, you can get close, but I mean, if there's any heat at all, there's conflict, there's clashing going on, right? No two A's are ever alike. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's like there's a lot about modern science, physics, that seems to indicate certain concepts within dialectical materialism. Now there are, and I know this because I almost wish I didn't know this, but there is a dialectical materialist critique of modern physics, and that may be what you're hinting at. There's a guy named Mike Gimbel. There's another guy named Eric Lerner, who've written books criticizing modern physics and arguing that it's inconsistent with dialectical materialism, and arguing that some of the concepts in Carl Sagan's Brief History of Time, etc., are not correct. And I know nothing about physics, So I have no authority with which to speak on this. But Dr. Eric Lerner, Mike Gimbel, they are Marxists. They've written their critique, and around the world, there are many Marxists who don't agree with the new physics. They reject Einstein. They reject Carl Sagan. They reject Stephen Hawking. And they argue for some of the older physics, arguing that the new physics is anti-dialectical. The Big Bang Never Happened is the book by Eric Lerner. It's probably the most circulated Marxist critique of the new physics. I have never read it, and I read Mike Gimbel's book. I still know nothing. I don't know enough to comment on that, and I'm not into physics. I just don't know enough about physics, honestly. I mean, I know a lot of people, when Mike Gimbel wrote his book, were very angry at Mike Gimbel for writing that, and we're just insisting, just furious, just insisting that was completely wrong and it was anti-scientific. But then around the world, there are many communists around the world who do reject the new physics, and I don't know enough about physics, right? I'm the kind of person that would seem to think that if there's a consensus in the scientific community, you ought to go with that. But again, the scientific community at one point believed in, eugenics and racism, right? The scientific community, has been wrong, right? David Fox says nothing is static, nothing is permanent, everything is in a constant state of change. Absolutely, right? A does not equal A. So I don't know enough about physics, but I don't think that I think that the concept of dialectical materialism, that all that exists is matter, right? Because science does not take into account spiritual things, right? It just takes into account what exists. So all that exists is matter, and that matter is constantly in a state of motion. I think that that's pretty consistent with modern science, is it not? I don't think dialectical materialism is non-scientific in that sense, but I mean, you know, I guess there may be aspects, right? It says all that exists is matter. Well, some people say, well, matter and energy, but energy is a measurement of matter in motion, is it not? Like I don't know enough about physics, so I can't, as somebody who knows nothing about physics, I'm not in a position to argue about physics. But if you want to read the kind of fringe minority within the Marxist community that criticizes modern physics, check out Dr. Eric Lerner, check out Mike Gimbel. And there's around the world, in Spanish-speaking countries, there's a lot more people talking this way, and in Asia and Africa. But in the English-speaking world, those are the two books you want to get your hands on. I don't understand them. I don't know enough about them. But the majority viewpoint among Marxists is that physics and dialectical materialism walk hand in hand, and don't see a contradiction between them. Alrighty. I have not read this book, Soviet Democracy. I have read Sidney and Beatrice Webb's book, Soviet Union, A New Civilization. I also read a book by Albert Szymanski called Human Rights in the Soviet Union, which is also a very good book. Traditional metaphysics. Okay. All right. Learn traditional metaphysics and traditionalists. I know about the traditionalists. I'll write it down, traditionalists. All right. All right. So, Human Rights in the Soviet Union is a good book. Albert Szymanski was a very good writer on imperialism and a number of topics. So, The Glory Days of the CPUSA, Lessons for Now. Well, the most important lesson, well, no, let me not say that. The first lesson I ever learned, not the most important lesson, but the first lesson I ever learned from the glory days of the Communist Party was this. When I went to the library, when I was a teenager, I was looking for communist literature, and I discovered a book published in 1932 by U.S. Communist Party presidential candidate William Z. Foster, called Toward Soviet America. And that book is written very, very clearly. Very, very, very clearly. Right? It's not an academic wank. It is not obscurantism. It is written extremely clearly. It's the kind of thing I could give to one of my coworkers, one of my fellow students at the time. And if you read anything by William Z. Foster or Earl Browder, who were the leaders of the Communist Party USA during the 1930s, they spoke and wrote very clearly. Very clearly. They communicated the ideas in a very clear way. And it was about how socialism would improve the lives of America's working people. That is, Dust James, you just gave me one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. But that in and of itself is so valuable, because so much of the Marxist material is written in a way, it's like trying to prove how smart the writer is. And that's not good. You should be writing in a way that people can understand it, right? And anything, The Daily Worker, any very good book by Moishe Olgin, Why Communism, Plain Talk on Vital Concepts, anything written in that period of the Communist Party history is so clear and so coherent. That is very important. The other thing about the Communist Party during those days was the Communist Party USA was very much leading economic struggles. People were starving and hungry, and the Communist Party led them to fight for better conditions, right? That was what the Communist Party did. They were leading economic struggles, and they, don't starve, fight. And it was a struggle oriented. I mean, that took priority. They were all about struggle, but they were going to the desperately poor people and organizing them, and finding desperately poor people and organizing them to fight. They weren't trying to, compete for a spot at Left Forum. They weren't trying to be king of the protest cage among, 1960s radicals. They were very much, they were desperately poor people, veterans, hungry people, and they were organizing them, to fight for their rights. And that was very important. And they were constantly putting forward a vision of what socialism would be like. They had very clear, very, very clear pamphlets about what a socialist United States would be. They talked about, there was a poem written by Langston Hughes. I've never heard of that. Never heard of that. Put one more S in the USA. Let's make it Soviet. Put one more S in the USA. Oh, we can win it yet. When the land belongs to the farmer and the factory to working men, the USA, once we take control, will be the USSA then. That was Langston Hughes, right? And they were constantly talking about what the socialist USA would be like. They had no shame in doing that. They talked about, what it would be like if they came to power. So, there's a lot to learn from the Communist Party. Right. What I will say is the Communist Party in the 1930s, they went through two phases. They went through what they call the third period, and then they went into the Popular Front. And that, both approaches, both the Popular Front strategy and the third period strategy, had their flaws and strengths. During the third period, that was when Albert Szymanski is the Red Stag. Albert Szymanski is an amazing writer. Is the Red Flag Still Flying? I mean, he's a great writer. Great writer. During the 1930s, during the third period of the Communist Party, that was, from like 1928 up until 1935, the Communist Party was all about struggle, and they were all about talking about revolution. And during that period, they organized huge protests of the unemployed, and they built independent labor unions. And during that period, they were very hostile to other leftist groups. And they were constantly talking about the need for a communist revolution. Everything they wrote was, we need a revolution. They explained it. They talked about the USSA. And they were very hostile to the Socialist Party, very hostile to the Trotskyites, very hostile to the anarchists. They called the other parties social fascists. That was problematic. They didn't do united fronts. They called it united front from below. They went to the masses. Right? So it was problematic in the fact they wouldn't work with other groups, but it was in the fact they were so dedicated to struggle during those years, and they were so much focused on promoting their ideology during those years. That was a strength. The Popular Front period was kind of the opposite. During the Popular Front period, they built unity. Their strategy was for communists to be at the center of an anti-fascist front. And because of that, they made huge alliances with actors, with musicians, with scientists, with intellectuals. They did very effectively build these huge anti-fascist organizations, and everybody knew the Communist Party was at the center of it. Now, in some cases, they would conceal their membership. They were not pushing communism as hard. In some cases, they really kind of, watered down the message to build these anti-fascist fronts. That wasn't so good. They didn't criticize the Democrats maybe as much as they should have. So there's criticism of the Popular Front to be had. There's criticism of the third period to be had. But those two periods, the Popular Front period and the third period of the Communist Party USA, were their strongest periods. They've never had as much influence as they had during those times. There were literally millions of people who hung on the word of the Communist Party during those years. And you should read their literature from that time. You should study what they did right, what they did wrong. When the capitalist economy had collapsed, millions of America's working people were looking for an answer. The Communist Party gave them an answer. When the fascist threat emerged, the Communist Party had a scientific definition and understanding of why the fascist threat emerged. There you go. All righty. So someone's asking me, should I join PSL or DSA? Well, first of all, I think that you need to understand that those are two completely different types of organizations. PSL is a vanguard formation, right? PSL is an organization. It's Marxist-Leninist. In PSL, you're expected to agree with their line 100%. If you have disagreements, you're going to be expected to keep them internal. And this doesn't just apply to PSL. This is any democratic centralist organization. Any disagreement you have with PSL's line, you're going to be required to keep it internal, and you're going to be required to give the whole of your life to being a member, the whole of your lives, according to Lenin. On top of that, it's a cadre organization. It's a disciplined cadre organization. DSA is a loose association. Anyone can join the DSA. You fill out a form on DSA's website, you're a member. DSA is a loose association that anyone can join. PSL is a cadre formation. If you're in PSL, they're going to require you to be part of doing their their work, which is they organize rallies. That's what PSL does. They organize rallies. If you're in DSA, you can do whatever the hell you want, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff to be part of, but you can do whatever the hell you want in DSA. It's just, as long as you agree with these four main points. DSA, there are people in DSA that are Maoists, there are Trotskyites, there are social democrats and all of that. And at the end of the day, I think DSA is controlled by a more social democratic and pro-imperialist clique, right? And they've kind of got it rigged so that they stay at the top. But at the end of the day, anybody can join the DSA. If I'm a journalist, so I do not join any organization, right? But if I were not a journalist, if I were the kind of person, if I was in a position to join groups, I might join the DSA, not because I have any illusions about the leaders of the group, but because it would be a place to meet people. I feel like in some ways, DSA is kind of like Students for a Democratic Society was in the 1960s. It's this mass left-wing activist group, and it's a place to meet people. I think there's a lot of great people in DSA. So, it's a great place to meet people. And DSA is so big, it has, there's a lot of places where there aren't many socialists, there's a lot of places where there aren't many people. So, DSA is a great place to meet people, and they're not going to kick you out for thinking, right? Whereas PSL, PSL, you're with them or against them. You're going to be for their ML Vanguard formation line, or you're going to be against it. Now, I spent 8 years not in PSL, but in the group that PSL split from, the Workers' World Party. So I know what it's like to be in one of those groups. And honestly, I learned a lot when I was in the Workers' World Party, and I got some very, very, very valuable experience. So, you ultimately have to decide what you want to do. I am trying to build something called the Center for Political Innovation, which is not a party, right? Which is not a party, it's a think tank. Because I think that there is an ideological problem and there's a lack of socialist education. And I think the way we can change the course of events in the United States is by providing people with real education about real socialist politics. That's what needs to be done. And CPI does not, you can be involved with CPI and be in PSL. You can be involved with CPI and be in DSA. There are people associated with the Communist Party that are involved. There are people already in DSA that are involved. There are people in some different groups that I will not name that are involved. And, so I want to build a think tank and engage in socialist education. What we do here on these lives, that's what I want to do, okay? And if you really want to make a difference, I would encourage you to get involved with the work that we're doing as CPI. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't join another group on top of that. And I think that would be fine. And at the end of the day, my hope is that CPI, the Center for Political Innovation, can have influence within a number of different organizations. Maybe CPI will correct errors of ML groups. Well, that's not the goal, right? The goal is to just kind of raise general awareness about the things we talk about on these lives. So if you want to get involved in that, send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com, and you can join our efforts to build a socialist think tank, a socialist and anti-imperialist think tank in the United States. That's what I see myself as doing. But, who's to say you can't do that and join some other group? I would never tell anyone not to join a group, right? If you want to be involved and you think that any particular group, not just the two that were named in the question, is going to help you get there, by all means, go for it. There you go. Alrighty, Planet of the Humans, Death, Cult, Malthusianism. Yeah, Death, Cult, Malthusianism. Malthusianism is not Marxism. Marxism is an ideology that believes in human progress. It believes in the economy expanding, and it believes that human beings have the ability to invent and be creative, and that we can get to a higher mode of production. Malthusianism is the belief there are too many people in the world, and that the problems of our society, of our economy, are caused not by the problems of capitalism, but by the problem of overpopulation. Malthusianism is very dangerous, and Malthusianism is the prevailing viewpoint among environmentalists right now, primarily because Malthusians are paying for the environmental movement, right? The environmental movement, it's Rockefeller think tanks, big oil companies, and foundations. They pay for this stuff, right? And their belief is that, there's too many people in the world, they're using too many resources, we need to transition to a lower consumption society. That's what they believe. And they're wrong, right? The answer to our environmental problems is progress. We need to get beyond fossil fuels. We need fusion energy. We need new scientific breakthroughs. That's what we need. We are not going to be better off if we just start, reducing the human population. Human beings are an optimistic species that expands. Look at human history. Look at ant farms. Ants have been building their ant farms the exact same way for thousands and thousands of years. Zinoviev and Kamenev. All right, writing it down. For thousands and thousands of years, ants have been building their ant farms the same way. Beavers have been building their dams the exact same way for thousands and thousands of years. Right? But human beings have gone from hunter-gatherer civilization to feudalism to capitalism, and we are in the process of transitioning now to socialism. No other species is like human beings in that way. There is something special about mankind. Right? There's something, we have a progressive, creative quality to us that is unique. It is unique to human beings. No other species has been able to change the way it interacts with its environment so dramatically and to force the environment to serve it so dramatically. Human beings have reinvented themselves over and over and over again. And that is something deeply, deeply special about human beings. We have the ability to progress. We have the ability to create. During ancient Mesopotamia, there was a very famous, there's the Epic of Gilgamesh. I don't know if people are familiar with it. It's considered the first poem in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story is that this mythical founder of Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh, battles the bull of heaven, this mighty bull. And he kills the bull of heaven, even though the bull of heaven is bigger, because he's a human, because he possesses intelligence. And that myth was one of the founding myths of Mesopotamia, that human beings, their intelligence is what sets them apart from animals. Right? Mesopotamia was the first society to have written laws, right? The Code of Hammurabi, right? And that human beings, right, have this special ability, right? There's a reason, up until today, right? I mean, the tradition of bullfighting can be traced back to the Code of to the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? In ancient Mesopotamia, to celebrate the human independence, from animal kingdom and the dominance of humans over animals, they would act out the killing of the bull of heaven. That's where bullfighting comes from. There's a reason that in, Christian literature, Christian art, the devil, Satan, has horns. Right? You ever looked at this? Why does Satan in Christian, paintings and such have horns on his head? Because he's a beast. He's a bull. Right? The horn represents the male aggression. Right? It's aggression and sex drive. Right? It's a bull. Right? A bull, a ram. Right? These are animals that just want to fight and have sex, right? And they have so much testosterone, they have these horns coming out of their head, and they do not possess human reason. And the reason that Satan is represented by having horns is because Satan is seen as being the bestial and primitive side of humanity. Satan is pure, unhinged aggression and cruelty. Satan is unrestrained sexual behaviors. Satan is a bull. Satan is a ram, right? Whereas human beings don't have horns, right? Human beings kill the bull. They not only kill the bull without, but they kill the bull within, right? The human beings have the ability to overcome their primitive desires, right? Their sex drive, their aggression, right? They have the ability to be creative, to invent new things. They have a non-animalistic side to them, and that is the good part of humanity, right? I'm explaining this all in terms of mythology, but and this is what the Malthusians don't understand. Malthusianism sees mankind as an animal, and it argues that we've been breeding too much, and so they should stop feeding us, right? There was a Republican representative in South Carolina years ago, and he said that they should get rid of food stamps because if you feed wild animals, they breed. That's what he thinks, right? And that's what the Malthusians think, right? The Malthusians, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, she had a pamphlet called The Cruelty of Charity. It was all about how charity, feeding the poor people, encourages them to have more babies. So instead, we should starve the poor people, and then their inferior genes that made them poor won't reproduce among the population. This is sick stuff. This is the British Empire. This is the imperialist mentality, right? This is the mentality of the ultra rich that are managerial. They're long-term thinking. Whereas the short-term thinking capitalists, they just want to make profits, right? You'll see the libertarians call out the Malthusians and stuff because they're just against social engineering. They just want to be free to do whatever they want, right? No government interference. But at the end of the day, right, Malthusianism, managerialism, this is the ideology of the ultra-rich that have a more of an oligarchical managerial view. Whereas you have just the libertarian right-wing, free market rich that don't care about the long term. They just want short-term profits. And that's the fight within the ruling class right now. There's a managerial, ultra-rich wing, and there's the rest of the ruling class. Trump, and he represents the kind of the rest of the ruling class rising up against the managerial wing in a time where there's a capitalist crisis and the rate of profit is falling, and the capitalists are fighting amongst each other because their system is falling apart. Right? At the end of the day, the problem of overproduction, the built-in problem of capitalism doesn't go away. Alrighty. Turkish Eurasianism. Some people are arguing that Turkey is moving in a more Eurasian direction. It kind of fits in with the, not Eurasian. I mean, Eurasia is a hemisphere, but I mean, not in geography, but in like ideology. People link Turkey and its government to Alexander Dugin and some of their teachings. I don't know. I've never been to Turkey, but it seems to me that the people that say that's part of the hysterical. There's a lot of hysteria among academics right now about illiberalism. They call it illiberalism, and it's like, oh my God, Western liberal free market, ideas are fading away, and there's illiberalism on the rise. And I think Erdogan, I think the Turkish state has always been rather had an autocratic edge to it. I mean, the Turkish military, the Turkish government has always been authoritarian. And, Kemal Ataturk and Turkish nationalism, I mean, there's always been a strong identity among Turks that they don't consider themselves to be Europeans. They don't consider themselves to be Western. So I don't buy that. I don't think, Alexander Dugin is manipulating the mind of Erdogan and making him like this. And actually, a lot of what Turkey is doing is not lining up with what Russia's doing. I don't buy it. Don't buy it. Now, Turkey, I will say Turkey it was a member of NATO, and still is a member of NATO. Turkey was pretty strongly in the camp of the West for a long time. That changed under Obama. Obama kind of inflated Turkey's power, pushed them into Syria. And in a lot of ways, now Turkey is involved in Libya. Now there's the situation with Azerbaijan. And, it appears to me that Turkey, has expanded its influence and its independence. Erdogan, I said, is a bourgeois nationalist. Okay. Traditionalism. That's a belief that's, Julius Evola. And the traditionalist belief is generally there's this ideal way of running a society, the organic state. And that as human history has progressed, as we've gotten more democratic and more egalitarian, I can't comment on that. As we've gotten more egalitarian and more democratic, we've moved away from this natural ideal. That's wrong. I'm sorry. That doesn't take into account anything that I said about human advancement and modes of production and creativity. Traditionalism basically is the opposite of everything I just said about human creativity and progress. Everything I just said on there, traditionalism would say that, ants have this natural way of building their ant farms. And if we could find the natural way, humans would just go back to the perfect natural way humans have always organized societies. It'll be perfect. That's what traditionalism argues, and it's wrong. And traditionalism, it's not, a lot of the beliefs of traditionalism are contrary to fascism, but fascism created traditionalism, right? There would be no Julius Evola if it weren't for the Italian fascist government, promoting Julius Evola's writings, okay? Julius Evola, that's true. Italian fascism is a quote-unquote, is very much a modernist or futurist ideology, but there would be no traditionalism if we're not for the Italian fascists. They promoted traditionalist teachings and traditionalist ideas. Oswald Spengler is also very similar among traditionalists. And I would argue that I don't accept traditionalism. It's interesting, though. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think we can gain insights into how humans think from mythology, from tradition, right? And I've read a lot of that stuff because it's important to read, and it's kind of having a revival. I mean, among conservatives in the United States, and these ideas are out there, and they are in a lot of ways, they are a right-wing critique of capitalism, which. Again, I mean, it's like in the United States, people are so stupid they don't think such a thing exists. Oh, Hitler couldn't have been right wing because he criticized capitalism. Well, not there's right wing anti-capitalism, folks, and traditionalism is a form of right wing anti-capitalism, right? I just don't agree with it, but I've studied it. I'm familiar with it. I know what it's about, and I don't agree with it. But it exists. I mean, these things exist, and they're worth knowing about. I mean, you should know about things. I don't understand why people don't want to know. Like I said, I have a thirst for knowledge. I want to know. I want to know, right? And if there's something out there, especially something that's having an impact on the world, I want to know about it. I'm constantly striving to know more. And then I'll tell you about it. Okay, all right. Zinoviev and Kamenev, right before the October Revolution. Zinoviev and Kamenev, they weren't for it. They voted against on the Central Committee seizing power in the Russian Revolution, and they were overruled. They voted to have a Russian Revolution. But then Zinoviev and Kamenev, I believe they ran to the bourgeois press, announced that the Bolsheviks were planning a seizure of power, and said they were against it. And at that point, Lenin wanted them kicked out of the Bolshevik Party. And the rest of the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party overruled Lenin. Lenin was furious. He said in a military situation, people could be executed for what they did. I mean, they announced to the capitalists that the Bolsheviks were planning an imminent seizure of power. And just so you know, they didn't agree with it. Well, the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks ruled that, they outruled Lenin. They outvoted Lenin, and they kept Zinoviev and Kamenev in the Bolshevik Party, even though they committed this really, really big offense. And so there you go. Again, if the Bolsheviks had been the cult of Lenin, if the Bolsheviks had been a group where no one ever disagreed about anything, they would have been tossed out on their butts and, gotten rid of immediately. But, and that's what Lenin wanted. And arguably Lenin was correct. But that shows that the Bolsheviks were not the cult of Lenin, right? Which is a point I've made many times. The Bolsheviks were not, Lenin, the cult of Lenin started after Lenin's death. And it was in response to the fact the Soviet Union, they needed a new ideology, they needed a new state. I get into that in my book. In my book on Kamala Harris, I talk about some of that. So it's worth discussing. All right, folks. It's been fun. I hope we can get that debate out of our system, move on to something new. Yeah, I'll just wrap it up here. Thanks for joining us. We're a little community here. We're always having fun together. We're always learning new things. I think we're on a great journey. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. We'll be back soon. I'm doing lots of lives these days. I'll be back soon. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Don't forget, folks, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Good night.